Welcome back, everyone, to Big Data Days 2022. Apologize for the delay because there was some technical issue, so we finally fixed it. So it's my great pleasure to welcome our next speaker, Adrian. Adrian is a data science consultant and instructor, having created or delivered self-serve online or in-person training for both individuals and companies. Affiliated to Ahead Technology, which is an ATO of APMG, he's an accredited big data framework instructor. Data visualization skills are essential for anyone working with data. So in this workshop session, Adrian will discuss how to leverage data visualization to help convince stakeholders and drive change, covering how to choose appropriate visualization based on the objectives, how to implement best practices and avoid common pitfalls when designing graphs, and how to build and present compelling presentation for different types of audiences and formats. So Adrian, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right, so let me share my screen. Let's see first if everyone can see the page that says introduction.
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so let's get started then. Okay, so quick introduction then. Let me see. Yeah, so that's the title of the of the press, building impactful data visualizations to convince stakeholders and drive change. I think the written title that was announced was even longer than that, so that's kind of a mouthful, I will admit. But basically, we're simply going to focus on techniques to design effective, convincing, and impactful data visualizations. That's about it. And from now on, I'm going to use the term data viz because it's just so much easier to say. I'm going to say that a lot during the next 2 hours. Okay, so what do we mean by data viz to begin with, right? Throughout this talk, let's agree on the definition. Data viz is going to be any graphical representation of data. Okay, so it can be a single chart, right? But it can also be a set of charts that you would present next to each other or in a slide deck. Or it can be an infographic or a charticle, as some call it. So basically, that's whatever is best to get your point across using visual support. Very well. Okay, introduction then. So who I am, who you are, and what we'll do. I'm not sure if there's a chat or not, and I admit that I won't be looking at it much, I guess, during the session. But basically, the idea is for you guys to, well, know who's talking to you, for me to understand my audience, because when you talk to a group of people, there's always someone who's gonna have a hard time with the material, and there's always someone who knows a lot about it who might get kind of bored. And I'm trying to address as many people as I can here, right? So I'm just trying to see how much you know about database already, how you use it in your regular work or personal environment, all that kind of stuff. Okay, and most importantly, we'll cover what we're going to do during these 2 hours, right? So during this quick onboarding, you can already fire up your favorite database tool, whether it's Power BI, Tableau, Excel, Python or R, Jupyter, D3. I honestly don't care personally, whatever you're most familiar with, so that it's easier to move through the workshop. All right. Next slide here. Well, presentations. There we go. So who I am, I'll go quickly about this because I've been introduced already. But yeah, data analyst, data engineer, data instructor, and I have a former business background, and I simply want to slightly insist on this. I switched to data science from a business background, and I like that in my profile in the sense that I used to be on the other side of things, right? On like listening to those reports, reading those reports. So I think it gives me a useful experience in understanding what stakeholders or management can expect from that kind of report and why. So if there's a chat, I let you all present yourselves in the chat. You put whatever information you want in there, so you don't have to put everything, but like name, position, experience, expectations from this session, so I can see if I hit the nail on the head or not. So basically what you expect to walk away with once this is finished, and your favorite database tool. Let's have a quick survey there. So again, yeah, you don't need to answer all of these, but it's going to help me understand who I'm talking to and where you stand regarding this topic. All right, now goals. What are we going to try to achieve with this presentation? What do I want you to walk away with? So let's take some time to agree on what to expect and what not to expect. Right? What not to expect. I'm not going to be exhaustive. Right? Data visualization is a vast field. I'm not planning on telling you everything there is to know about this. I don't spend much time on visual grammar, for example, like axes, shapes, those different kind of things. So yeah, there's only 2 hours. I'm going to try and give you as much as I can, but I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I'm also not trying to be prescriptive. Right? I'm not here to tell you what to do exactly and to tell you what to use in which specific situation. We are going to cover situations, we are going to cover examples, we are going to cover what chart works well with what kind of data or what kind of situation. But it's not a one-size-fits-all application, right? So what I'm trying to give you instead is a framework so that you can think about how you approach your data visualizations, so that you have a kind of a checklist to go through, so that you have different options to attack a visualization project. And basically, my personal goal for this session is to provide you with a foundation, right? So I want you to walk away from this presentation with a solid foundation about data visualization so that you can keep practicing and keep improving your skills after those 2 hours, because in 2 hours, there's only so much we can do, right? Very well. So a framework, a foundation, and then we'll see how interactive we can be. The video conferencing format does not allow me to just take any questions once you raise your hand, but I will stop at the end of each section to take any questions. So you will have chances to ask me stuff throughout the presentation. Okay, cool. Let's keep going. So about the outline, this is how we're going to unfold this whole presentation. And before I dive into this, I again remind you to fire up your favorite database tool if you haven't done it already. You're going to be using it soon. Okay, so what we're going to do first is I'm going to list a few dataset sources, and I'm going to ask you to choose a dataset, right? One or several. I'll get onto it later, but basically you're going to choose a dataset to work with, and I advise to choose several datasets so that you can try different things, and so that you have a plan B in case your first dataset is too messy or not that interesting. And then after each session, we'll have an activity, right? So I'm giving you the dataset sources. You're going to have 10 minutes to choose a dataset and start exploring it a little. Then we'll have some quick information before diving in. So like, for example, why do we want to use database in the first place and why is it so efficient? Activity 2, storytelling. So we're going to cover some techniques about taking your audience into account. It's a bit more than storytelling, but it revolves around storytelling because it's basically all the elements that are going to impact the way you build your story. Activity 3, and so database fundamentals. So those are stuff that I expect you to be familiar with, but I still want to cover those. So I'm going to cover them, but I'm going to cover them quickly. And I'm going to assume that you have already had some kind of exposure to these concepts, right? But you will have, again, a chance to ask questions. And obviously, we're not going to run through all of the charts that you can build because there's a ton of those. But we will try and give examples of charts that work well in a specific situation. Activity 4, and then we will finish with structuring your approach, which might look weird to some of you, maybe. I don't know. Why do we talk about structuring the approach at the end? Well, because everything that comes before is fundamental to structure your approach. And if you haven't gone through the previous steps, or if you don't have your database fundamentals, if you haven't considered your audience, there's no need to jump right into your checklist to build your data visualization. So if it doesn't make sense, it will when we get there. No worries. All right, and then activity 5. And if you wonder what the activities are going to be, it's nothing crazy hard in a way. Like you're going to choose a data set, you're going to start quickly exploring it. You will have the chance to keep exploring it when I'm covering the before we dive in section if you want to. And then basically, what I'm going to have you do is take 10 minutes after each section so that you can take the learnings that we just covered and see how it would apply to the use case that you've chosen, to the data that you've chosen. All right, so let's move on to dataset selection then. You're going to select a dataset that you're interested in. I'm going to give you sources of data, like sources of data sets rather, but you can use any source that you like. If there's a source that you like that's not listed here in this list, feel free to choose data from somewhere else. Feel free to choose personal or professional data that you want to work with if you want, because you're not going to have to share what you do. So if you want to keep it local and personal, you can. And that's about it. So I basically need you to select a couple data sets on questions you're interested in. If you want to focus on business, you can, but you don't have to, right? And frame some questions around the data. What do you want to ask from the data set? What kind of insights are you expecting to get out of it? And then we're going to try and work around those questions as we move throughout the session, right? So what kind of data set you can work with? Again, any kind of data set you want. If you want to focus on business, you can, because I imagine that most of you are going to use database in those applications. But if you want to take this opportunity to have fun and work on a Pokemon data sets, I'm not going to prevent you from doing that. So you've got pretty much everything, like IDH, evolution over the years, terrorist attacks, any data set you're interested in. And do have a quick look at it to make sure that you have enough data in it and that it's not too dirty, that kind of stuff. All right, so it's 16 now. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to go on one of those or several of those websites here and choose some data sets that you're interested in. Start looking into those. And at 25, we will move on to the next session. So you can go ahead and start looking for your data sets. And in the meantime, while you do that, I can already start taking questions if there are any. Otherwise, I will see you in 10 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Feel free to ask any questions if you have, because this is a workshop session. So we try to keep things a bit more engaging and interactive as well for the participants and for Adrian as well. So if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. All right. So you can use the question box on the right-hand side of the screen. You see the question mark there. Just click on that and just put in your question.
Right, and I see we have a small group, and that's kind of great news actually, because we're going to be able to keep things interactive and benefit from the experience of each other. So at the moment where I ask if you have some questions, you can also feel free to just like take the mic and make a remark, share some experience, all that kind of stuff. I don't really expect you to have any questions right now, considering we haven't covered much, but you might have some more questions down the road. So I will do my best to answer them then. All right, so to maybe help you choose a data set, one data set that I personally particularly like is the Global Terrorism Database, which is edited by the University of Maryland. Yeah, so that's a database that I've been working on in the past for my master's at Georgia Tech, and basically you have all the terrorism events, I think from the 70s, yeah, from the 70s, and you have a lot of information about those, right? So there's a ton of information, and the dataset is really, really big. But you obviously have a unique ID, the year, the month, the day when the terrorism event happened. You've got some data about whether it was a long event, like more than one day or not. You've got some data about how the event was resolved. Um, you've got some information about where this happened, so the country. You've got some information about the region, and you actually have a lot more information than that because you have 135 columns, right? So that's a lot. So you've got some information about the type of the attack, so categorical data. You've got information about the kind of weapons that were used. You've got some comments about how the attack unfolded. So that's text data, pure text data on which you can do NLP. What else do you have? Well, the number of people that were killed or hurt.
Adrian, we do have one question coming
Yeah,
from Gandhi.
sure.
Let me just project that question. Could you share about how we could optimize Google data sheet into digital marketing? That is a question.
I'm sorry, can you give me the question again?
Yep. If you click on the question mark.
Ah, over there. Okay. Yeah, got it.
Yep.
Can you add some details about the question? Because I'm not sure what you're asking exactly, or like specifically like how it relates to data. How do you want to leverage data for that?
Now we have another question here.
Without having Latin wrong in the data set, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Tools that I know of, there's two things that would come in mind, one that's very specific and one that's going to be a little more vague. But I'm going to keep that in mind because basically any question that's specific and where I'm not going to be 100% satisfied with my answer, I'm going to do research after. I'm going to put them in a Google Drive to which you will have access. I will share the link with you guys in a minute, actually. In this drive, you will find some resources about the frameworks that we are covering today, and I am going to add some more information after. And so I will look into specific tools and list them there. But some tools that come to mind right now that I know of, there's Tableau. Tableau is able to find a lot of locations based on a lot of data. So you can have longitude and latitude, and they obviously Tableau works well with that. You can have the zip code as well, some addresses, some counties. Tableau is that I know of. There might be other tools, but Tableau is one of the best tools at managing geographical data because they have a pretty big database and a lot of different options to go about that data to begin with. And the other thing that I can think of would be some libraries. So if you use Python or R, you might be able to find some libraries about geolocation that would help you visualize those. And then I think that you could also use IP addresses. So if you have IP addresses, you might be able to geolocate them without needing latitude or longitude. I hope that answers your question, but feel free to let me know if not. Yeah, there's a lot of other tools that you can use for analytics purposes. There's a lot of different organizations that help you get some data about your marketing, your SEO, that kind of stuff. One that I worked with is Does. It's definitely not the bigger player in this area, but it's the one that I know the best because I used to be a content writer for them when I was a student. Um, I don't know of a tool that would be better than Google Analytics, though. The only thing that I could think of if you have specific needs would be to plug yourself on this data and to try and build a dashboard that answers very specific questions that you may have. And then you can build this dashboard in, Power BI, Tableau are probably the ones I would recommend, but you can also do something with JavaScript or Python if you want to go that route. Is that going to be better than what Google Analytics provides you with? I doubt it, because Google Analytics is a really, really complete tool for digital marketing. So I'm not sure if there's something better than that out there. But I'm not a digital marketing expert, so I don't know about all the tools that are used for that. Cool packages that I could suggest for database apart from the ubiquitous Matplotlib, etc. Not really, because those libraries are elephants for a reason, right? So they are the best that are out there. Matplotlib is definitely not my favorite tool personally. I think it's very verbose, and it's not necessarily like it takes a lot of effort to make things pretty. But Matplotlib is insanely good in the sense that you can do anything with it. It's got a complex syntax and everything, but you can really, really do any graphical representation with it, not just data viz. So the cool thing with Matplotlib is that the good library is built on top of it, right? So the one library that I really love in Python is Seaborn, like probably a lot of you out there. And Seaborn is great because it abstracts the nitty-gritty details and it makes the plots pretty by having a layer on top of Matplotlib, right? But there are some cool tools out there to think about data visualization, not necessarily to build them, but to think about them. And we will see some of those tools as we move throughout the session. And there is a visualization out there by Jan McCandless that compares all the different data visualization tools and how easy they are to manipulate and how efficient they are, and whether they are free or whether you have to pay for those. I think this chart is really, really good. You don't necessarily have to agree with the ranking that Jan decided upon, but that it definitely has all of the major tools up there, and it helps you compare them. So the more I look into data viz and the less I think about data viz as tool specific, like I want to do this in Python and I'm going to find a way to do this in Python. And the more I actually start with pen and paper and sketch. Right? And then based on what exactly I'm trying to do, I'm going to choose the right tool. I'm definitely a Python guy, so it's going to be my go-to, whether it's Seaborn or Plotly for interactivity. But it doesn't mean that they are the best out there. Data science is going the route of web development, where more and more of the coding details are abstracted into software tools like Tableau, and they do a great job at that. So sometimes you have to wonder if it's really worth it coding your visualization, or if you should manipulate your data, export the CSVs of the visualizations you want to build, and use other tools to do that. I'm not saying you should, but it's worth asking the question if there are other tools than the one you're used to out there that would help you do the job faster and better, because that's kind of the goal. And would data analysts need skills like Adobe Photoshop to create a visualization that could be added in public reports, etc.? That's a very good question. And then we'll keep going on the session. but I hope you will have a data set that you're ready to play with. No, like it's definitely not a need, right? And actually, Adobe, I don't think you would use Adobe Photoshop for that. I think you would use Illustrator. That's what data journalists would use. Basically, you could build something in Tableau, export it as I think SVG, and manipulate that on Illustrator to make it pretty, but you keep the actual dimensions. So you're not manipulating the data to like the proportions that you're going to have on the chart are the mathematically rigorous proportions that you had out of your analysis, right? You're just making the colors prettier, the typographic prettier, etc. Adobe Illustrator actually wasn't updated for 20 years in terms of charts available. But now there's a plugin, I've forgotten the name, but simply like I can put it in the resources, or it should be easy to find in Google search. But there's a plugin for Illustrator that is very specific to data visualization. A data journalist would need to do that because systematically their charts are going to be read by people that are not necessarily chart literate or data literate. And it's going to be published in print or on a website. Like it's journalism, it has to be polished. But when you're going to present to just your manager or like show the QQ plot of your linear regression, you don't necessarily need to use Adobe Illustrator. So that's also something you need to decide for yourself is how far you want to go down that route, right? Because you can always add some more. You know, and if you're in a big organization, there's probably someone who's really, really good at database and whose job it is to actually polish all of the visualizations that will get published and will be presented to external stakeholders. And then the question is, do you want to be that guy, right? Are you interested in analysis more or in visualization more? And in the end, if at some point you could focus exclusively on visualization, is this something that you would like to do? Because if you end up being the best guy at your company or the best lady at your company that can build visualizations, then you're going to be the go-to person for that kind of job. So is that something that you want? All right. And what kind of visualization is most effective to convince stakeholders? That's a good question, and there's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So we're going to cover that and what works well in which situation during the session. And yes, we're going to look at some visualization. So I suggest we keep going, and some of those things are going to unfold, right? Am I still sharing my screen? Yes. Okay, good. So activity 1 done. And before we dive in, a word about data. So you've heard about the term data is the new oil, I imagine, because it's been repeated ad nauseam for 10 years now. So that's the catchphrase that you probably heard before. And why is data the new oil? It's the new oil because it's ubiquitous, it's valuable, and it's innovation driving. Okay, fine. What I would say is it's also the new oil because it's inundating, right? It's ubiquitous, but it's inundating. Like it's really everywhere, and it flows everywhere around us, whether we see it or not. To the point that we are bombarded with data every day. Like you look at an ad in the subway and there's likely a stat there, there's a comparison, there's so many people prefer that product to that product. Like you see numbers everywhere all the time, you're bombarded with it, and it's just adds some noise and it doesn't really help with comprehension, right? So when you hear or read or watch the news, you hear about 1 million people there, $1 billion there, but at least for me, it doesn't mean anything. It's completely out of context because there's no comparison. Like you don't know it's a million compared to what. So if you look at the company valuation, if you look at the cost of relief efforts or the size of a market, you're going to have billions thrown everywhere. It helps to look at a lot of different values in billions and see how they interact with each other. And I will show you where you can find that visualization, because Ian McCandless built one to wrap his head around what's a billion. Okay, and so that basically means that data is not understandable without context around it, and database helps bring that context around it. But why do we use database to begin with, right? Why do we have to? Why don't we just look at tables and throw statistics out there? So the first reason is it makes the abstract tangible. When you talk about numbers, when you talk about statistics, it tends to be abstract. And when you build a visualization on it, you see it. You can relate to it. So that's the first big advantage of data visualization, making the abstract tangible. The other reason is providing context. So we just gave an example of that. And another reason is to leverage emotion. And believe it or not, you want to leverage emotion when delivering analytical reports. Might seem paradoxical, but that's the way it is. Why? Because emotion plays a key role in perception and decision making, right? And so not relying on the emotion can hinder not the way that your analysis is perceived, but the analysis itself, right? So there was a study that was ran on people who had a brain injury and their emotion center was damaged, right? So if you ask them to do analytical tasks like adding, subtracting, dividing, they can do that and it's easy and they don't have an issue with that. But ask them in which restaurant they want to go eat tonight, and they are going to be completely blocked. They're going to be completely blocked because they can't rely on their emotion to simply decide which food they want to go and eat tonight. And so they end up like analyzing all kind of variables and going down the rabbit hole. So emotion, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not, we are wired that way. Emotion impacts our analysis. It has a key role in there. So what we want to do ourselves is leverage it ethically, obviously, to help get our points across. And we need to take that into account. We can't do without because it's going to impact the analysis, whether we want it or not. All right, and another reason we use data viz is it's easier to remember. It's just that way. A visualization is easier to remember than a simple number of statistics. A story is easier to remember than a simple number of statistics, and we're going to get back to this later. So the data visualization builds context around the data, right? It tells a story, and in a sense, asking why we want to use data viz with data is analogous to asking why we create video clips for music, right? We have the track and we want to listen to the music. So why are there video clips everywhere every time a song is released? Well, for the same reason. It's because they add to the emotion and they tell a story. It's up to you to judge if those stories in video clips are good or bad, but it does tell a story around the music. So it improves the way you remember the music and it adds to the emotion of the music. Okay, let's look at some viz together and let's see what we think about them. So I think I've put them here. All right, there we go. I'm going to switch back and forth, I think, between this and this screen where I can see what you're saying. So first visualizations, this one, an area chart. I'm going to give you 1 minute if you want to participate in the chat to tell me how you feel about this chart, whether you think it's good or bad, and what you think we could be improving. And let me try and do this. Is that going to be good if we do that? Might be. And that way I can see your questions and your comments and the charts, leave the chart on the screen. Right, and the reason I want to do this activity, maybe just to because we're jumping in there, before we attack specific advice, etc., I just want to show you that you already have a good intuition about what a good data is, right? Maybe you're confused about the best way to go about this, and that's totally understandable. But as a consumer, as a data consumer, I assure you, you know when you see a bad chart or a good chart, and that's already something that you can rely upon. Maybe you're not able to explain exactly what you don't like, but you should have an opinion about those. So What's wrong with that specific visualization? Several things, right? So why flip it? It's an area chart, it's positive numbers. Why is this chart going down? Why is 873, which is greater than 721, lower? It should be upper, or those should be negative numbers, right? So there's probably two reasons I can see for flipping this chart that way. Maybe because we're talking about death, and so the person who built that wanted to highlight how it's people less that disappear from the surface of the planet, basically. But in that case, you put negative numbers, right? There's absolutely no reason to have that kind of thing here. Another reason I can find is because they wanted to have the red look like it's blood running down, and that's a bad reason, right? Your chart design needs to help convey your messages. It shouldn't never take precedence over the insight that you're trying to convey. That's just bad design. Right? Because you make the chart pretty to look at doesn't mean that it's going to reach the goal that you had originally. Okay, next chart here. So if you want to react in the chat about that chart, feel free to do so. I'm going to keep unfolding what's wrong with those, but feel free to react. It's appreciated. What's wrong here is why are we using two different charts? Right? Why are we using two different charts there? We have a bar chart, we have a line chart, but we're comparing the exact same thing. We're comparing the units sold in billion for Samsung and Apple. So that's not a good design for the chart. That should be grouped bar chart, where basically Samsung is in blue, but stuck to each bar there, so that we can actually compare the sizes of the things we're talking about. But these are much smaller than for Apple. So that might be why they chose to do that. But still, if you want to make a comparison, use the same design. Third chart. What's going on here? That's the biggest 0.08% I've seen in my life. Right? It's almost double when you just have a very, very small increase. So that's just not working. Like you shouldn't do that. Like, that's not even. That's obviously something that's been done in, I don't know, like a design tool, but there's absolutely no data supporting the chart behind. It's a bar colored with a title on top. And so that's exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about Tableau and Illustrator, right? Whatever you get out of Tableau, you're going to have the right proportions. You're not going to be able to do that kind of stuff. I mean, you're going to be able to do that, but you shouldn't, and you will have the right proportions originally, so you won't have to guess them. What about this Obamacare enrollment? So here we have the charts by Fox News, the usual suspects for chart junk. We don't even have an axis. We don't even have an axis for the Y here. This is bad. You don't build charts without an axis. That's a big no-no. What's happening here is that if you look at the data objectively, we're actually pretty close, right, to reaching the enrollment objectives, because we have 6 million here and we want to get to 7 million. And it makes it look like we just reached a third of the objective when we're actually very close to reaching it. And what they did basically is just zoom in on top of the bar chart to make it look much smaller, right? So that's just blatant manipulation. So obviously you shouldn't do that. And if you want to make sure that you don't do that kind of thing by mistake, honest mistake, then there's a book called How Not to Lie, not to lie with statistics, that covers the different pitfalls that you should avoid when you're doing that kind of thing. Very well, but yeah, so Fox News, if you want to find some chart junk, there's a lot by Fox News. I could probably publish a book about chart junk just using their charts. These charts, games, it's a mess, right? There's way too many things on this pie chart. There's parts that have the same color. Good luck finding which one is Zelta and which one is BOTW, and it's built on a data set that wasn't even clean. right? Because you can see there's so many duplicates, like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, 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 Zelda, Breath of the Wild. These are all the same. So another big no-no, don't build the visualization with data that you haven't cleaned, right? If your data is dirty, your visualization obviously is going to be dirty as well. US smartphone market share. So that's Steve Jobs presenting the market share for Apple. That's a well-known chart, right? That's a famous one. Apple is here in green. RIM, so the BlackBerry editor, biggest market player at the time, is here, and the green part here looks pretty similar to the blue one here because of the perspective, because of the way the chart is switched. So 3D is something that you want to walk away from when you're doing visualizations most of the time, unless you have something that's very specific about this, like, I don't know, elevation for the oceans or the mountains. Maybe then you want to use 3D, but you don't need 3D for a pie chart. And the only reason you use 3D for a pie chart and you flip it that way is to make your market share look almost as big as your competitor, which actually has twice your market share. What do we have next? Max, can you expand on your points? Wait, let's see one reply here. I see what you mean. Yeah, some of those charts are definitely trying to manipulate. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing that now. Some of the charts are definitely trying to manipulate whoever is consuming them. That's absolutely true, and that's actually pretty common. And if you want to not fall for that kind of data manipulation as a consumer, I send you back to the book I was talking about before, How Not to Lie with Statistics. And you're going to see all of the tricks that can be used to make stats say what they are not saying. Right? Statistics and analysis is a very subtle field, and it doesn't have room for that kind of manipulation. So that's what I would understand. Let me just type it here. How not to lie with statistics. It's a good one to go through. All right, and this one is my favorite. That Venn diagram, you have trust, partnership, innovation, and on the right you have our values. And I don't think Thomson Reuters that this chart is saying what you think you're saying, what you want to say, right? It just makes it look like you have very, very little overlap between your values and trust, partnership, innovation, and performance. Okay, so that's it for the bad charts. Now I'm going to show you some good charts, right? Some really, really good charts. And to be clear, before we look at those, these are charts that are built by like an expert on data viz and a data journalist. So I've shown you the worst. I'm going to show you the best. Try and hit something in the middle, because this is built with custom tools. It relies on D3, and I don't necessarily advise that you learn D3 as an analyst. I think it's one of the best data visualization tools that you have out there, because you can build everything you want the way you want it and make everything interactive the way you want it. And you can put that on a web page and you can make it interactive. So you really have a lot of very good practice for data viz and for conveying messages when you master D3, but it's a web tool, right? It's not a data analysis tool, and sometimes you're just in Jupyter, you want to use Python for everything, and that completely makes sense. And in that case, you're going to go for Plotly, maybe Bokeh to build some interactivity. But the best tool for this is D3, in my opinion, as far as programming is concerned. So one visualization that's really, really good is this one, right? So right now we have something going on between Ukraine and Russia, and it's shaking the world. And how do we go about thinking about those issues, right? And so one way to think about the whole issue around this and about how countries are reacting and how energy is impacting them is to think about who is dependent on Russian gas. Right? So who are the bigger producers of gas? And you see that Russia is the number 2 producer, but number 1 exporter, right? And then you can see the countries that depend a lot on Russian gas exports. And you can see Germany depends a lot on it, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time on this vis. You can go ahead and look at it, but it also like puts into context exactly like which countries are heavily dependent on it, and is that impacting the way they react to this crisis, right? And notice that these are very simple visualizations, right? So granted, it's a web page, it flows into each other, it's really nice, and you won't have time to build something so polished. Very fair. But a Sankey diagram that's completely approachable, and you can actually build those with online tools in Chrome. You don't even need to use Python or whatever. This is a simple tree map, right? So the message here is keep your viz simple, to the point, pack them with information, but keep them digestible. So don't put more information if that hinders your message. Keep them to one specific message, which usually you state in your title. And that's it. And if you want to demonstrate other stuff, build other charts, but don't pack everything into one chart. That's not going to happen. Another interesting viz, and then we go back to presenting some best practices and everything, would be this one, snake oil supplements. So basically what this shows here is, can we find it? Why is it not showing? There we go. Right, so those are like food supplements, and so you've got the name of the food supplements right here, like in bold, and below you have the condition that it's supposed to be good for, right? And on the x-axis, you have the scientific evidence supporting the claim that this substance is good for that condition. So on top, you have the ones that actually work. So yes, coffee is good for heart disease. Yes, cannabis is good for multiple sclerosis. Yes, ginger is good for nausea and vomiting. And when you go down, you see the ones that are not supported at all. So vitamin E, there's no evidence that it's going to increase your longevity. There's no evidence that vitamin D cures cancer. There's no evidence of those things, right? And so the way this was done, for example, I imagine this was done in Tableau. This was exported in Illustrator, and the color, the gradient here from yellow to dark green was probably added on Illustrator to make things prettier. I imagine. Again, I can't tell you. I wasn't there when the chart was built. Okay. All right, let's go back to the presentation now. Find one viz you love, one that you think could be improved. I think we're just going to skip this activity because we're reaching half the training already, and I wanna keep going, right? But yeah, it's a good exercise. Like I'm going to talk about chart literacy later, and there's no secret. Like if you want to get good at something, you need to be exposed to that thing, and you need to practice that thing. Right? It's the same thing for everything. So as far as data visualization is concerned, build some charts. Doesn't matter if they are ugly or if they are pretty. They are going to be more and more efficient the more you build them. And more importantly, look at some charts. Keep looking at some charts. Keep thinking about what you're seeing. Build yourself, like bookmark the ones that you think are very efficient at doing something, etc. Because that's one of the approaches that you can use to build your own data visualization that we will talk about later. But yeah, you need to look at some charts, and you need to look at people who do good charts. So the New York Times, Data is Beautiful. I have some resources that I've put in a sheet on the drive that I will give you access to at the end of the training. All right, so let's skip this and let's go straight to storytelling. So storytelling, like we're going to talk about the audience, etc. I'm talking about storytelling because that's what you want to build around your data, right? Your data visualization should come with storytelling. What exactly is data storytelling, right? So it consists of three things. Right? It consists of the data that you're working with. It consists of the visualization or visualizations you're building, and it consists of your story, right? What you're saying with your data, what you're trying to convey, right? Like the story around the Ukraine-Russia thing was, well, who who is dependent on that gas, how does that impact Russia? Like, are they big importers for Russia? So if they stop importing, is that going to impact Russia? And how is that going to impact themselves? Like, do they actually rely a lot on Russia, etc.? So you have that narrative. And so the story is made of two things. The story is made of the question and the goal. And the question is what makes your whole data visualization endeavor interesting, and the goal is what makes it useful. Sometimes the question is given to you, so you don't have a choice on whether it's going to be interesting or not, and then you can do your best to go further, reformulate, try to find some good angles to make that as interesting as you can. And your goal, you need to state it because you need to make sure that you're going to reach it, right? Okay, and again, stories are easier to remember than pure stats, right? So you want to leverage that power, and it's the combination of a narrative and a visual that is going to make your visualization so impactful, right? For the very same reason that we can't get enough of reading comics, watching series, or watching movies, right? It's something that's like wired in. The combination of a narrative and visualization just makes it so much more interesting, if not addictive. Right. So what are you when you're presenting your results and your visualization? You wear several hats when you do that, right? You're a miner because you have gone into the data and you have extracted the gold out of it. You're a narrator because you are telling a story to explain the insights that you found and why they are interesting and useful. You are a translator because you have transformed data points into insights and you make them easy to understand. And you're also an educator, right? Because you're going to need to explain what's going on to your audience, right? Sometimes, like, if you have the opportunity, we'll talk about formats, but if you have the opportunity to be there when your data visualization is consumed, then you have the opportunity to explain what's going on the chart, right? So labeling your axis, putting annotations, all of this helps, but if you can be there and explain exactly what's going on the chart, what the ideal chart would look like, and how this one differs, or how this one is exactly the same, that's good news. That's your educator role right there, right? So if we look at this chart here, this is a chart about the efficiency of different measures to fight COVID, right? So isolation of COVID cases, canceling small gathering, closing educational institutions, closing borders, yada yada, right? So that's all the measures that were taken to try and prevent COVID from becoming a worse crisis than what we have known. And that's a whole paper on what was efficient and or not, and whether we actually have evidence to support that. This is a really, really good data visualization, but it's also pretty advanced in the sense that you have a delta, RT, you have confidence intervals, you have z-scores, you have different types of modeling. So that's things you need to be familiar with, like lasso, RF, TF. It's not going to talk to someone who's not into data, right? So when you present that chart, you're going to have to explain it, right? You're going to have to explain how you're supposed to read those confidence intervals, what the z-scores mean here, etc., right? Or if you're publishing that into a report, then you have to provide a text to talk about it. So the text that comes with this chart, I'm going to read it to you. The left-hand panel shows the combined 95% confidence interval of delta RT for the most effective interventions across all included territories. The heat map in the right-hand panel shows the corresponding z-scores of measure effectiveness as determined by the 4 different methods. Gray indicates no significantly positive methods agreeing, no significantly positive effect, and NPIs are ranked according to the number of methods agreeing on their impact from top, significant in all methods, to bottom, ineffective in all analysis. All right, so that's already a little clearer, right? You know what each thing relates to, you know how to interpret the color coding here, etc., etc. And then, depending on your audience, which we're going to talk about in a minute, you may want to go even further and talk about what the z-score is and what the delta is and what the confidence interval is. But you want to break down what you're talking about so that people don't have questions and understand what's going on the screen. All right, and you're also an entertainer, right? You're going to need to keep your audience engaged throughout your presentation. If it's short, it should be easy enough. If it's long, it's much harder. So yeah, you're going to have to try and keep the audience attentive. So if you want to look at an incredible way of presenting data, you can type Hans Rosling BBC in YouTube, and you can see Hans Rosling explaining you how different countries have evolved over the last 100 years. It's pretty impressive. It's an incredible viz. If you haven't watched it already, I highly recommend it. All right, the next thing you want to consider before you build your database is who your audience is, right? How many people are you talking to? Because if you're talking to 2 people or 100 people, you're not going to have the same interaction with them. How familiar are they with the data? Have they already manipulated the data set, or are they just coming here without any context on what you're about to present? How technical are they? Are you talking to someone from management, or are you presenting to the data science team? Because the data science team might want some details about your model parameters, but management might not care about it. What is their interest or objective in listening to your presentation? Are you showing how users behave? Are you delivering results on whether a course of action was successful or not? Like an expansion into a new market or a product launch or a website redesign. What your audience expects from your presentation is going to impact your goal, right? And therefore your story. And finally, what will it take to convince them? If you have some information about some people who are particularly sensitive to some kind of arguments, you can leverage that to your advantage as well. So on top of that, you need to come ready to defend what you're presenting. So come with additional information that you don't have in the V's or don't have in your analysis, but that you can use to go further, to provide more context about what's going on. Be ready to answer the questions that your audience will have about your database and the data behind it, and come equipped with arguments so that you can expand on your conclusions if you need to. And what your format is, right? So maybe all you need to do is a chart. Maybe you're exploring your own data. Maybe you're looking at the QQ plot from your sklearn regression model. The built-in functions in R or Python are sufficient for that, right? You don't need to make your QQ plot fancy, right? So you don't really care at that point. Or maybe you're just asked to export a simple chart into a PNG that will be added to a slide later. So you don't actually have the opportunity to build a whole of storytelling around it. You need a chart. It needs to be straight and to the point. So the format that you're asked is going to impact what you're going to build and what you're going to be able to build, authorized to build as well. Maybe you can build a notebook so that you can show some data manipulation, explain what's going on, add some text explaining how the chart was built and how to read it. Maybe you need to export it to a PDF, so they don't want to see your code and everything. So maybe there's some stuff that you're going to have to be a little clearer about. Maybe you're just presenting a slide deck, so you need several charts. Maybe you have a lot of leeway and you're able to build an interactive app online and leverage D3 and build something that people can actually manipulate. Or maybe it's going to a publication, into a journal or onto a newspaper website, and then it needs to be really, really polished. And then that's where you might want to leverage the Tableau and Illustrator capabilities. Right, so the different formats that you have here, they are going to impact your storytelling possibilities. They are going to impact your educational opportunities, so the way you're going to be able to explain what's going on. And they are going to impact your interactivity opportunities, right? So simple chart in PNG, no interactivity at all. Slide deck, at least you can talk and explain some stuff. App, well, fantastic, because they can manipulate the data themselves. And that to me is just the holy grail of data visualization and data appropriation, if I may say so. Okay, we'll talk about interactivity maybe a little later if we have time. Okay, and then how will you deliver your report, right? Is it going to be live? Is it going to be a small meeting, a large meeting? Is it going to be a conference, a video conference? This is going to impact the way you interact with your audience and the way you can answer their doubts or even see if they understand or not. You know, like for example, right now I'm looking at my screen and my notes. I don't see your faces, so I can't like see you frown or that kind of stuff and see that there's something that you're missing and jump on it to like make sure that you understood it, you know, before you even have to ask a question. If we were live, if you were sitting in front of me, then maybe we could react differently and go about this differently. And maybe you're going to present that async, right? Maybe you're going to send your PDF in an email. Maybe you're going to send a recording of you presenting. So again, those delivery formats are going to impact what you can build and how you build them. And finally, do you have any additional constraints, right? Any constraint, really, constraint of time. So maybe you don't have to do something really, you don't have time to do something really, really polished. Maybe there are some tools that you absolutely need to use because, well, you know, your company is using Tableau. So maybe you're better at Power BI, but too bad, you're going to have to do that in Tableau, you know. So yeah, are there some tools that you're forced to use? Are there some tools that you maybe you can use anything you want? You know, if you're the most data literate or the only data literate person at a small company, you're going to do what you want in terms of what tools you can use. You're the one with the data context, and you're free to choose what you think is best. Right? If you work in intelligence, you're going to have to ask a ton of authorization just to do a pip install. So you're going to have to use the libraries that have already been authorized. All right, and then are there type guidelines from your company? You know, maybe there's colors, typographies that you need to use because they're going to be put in the company deck, presented to, I don't know, shareholders, whatever. Okay, are there any questions about this? And at the same time, as I'm going to take questions in the chat, I invite you to take 5-10 minutes because I wanna be sure that we finish on time, obviously. So 5-10 minutes to think about what I just said, to think about the data set that you've selected, the questions that you came up with, and the way that the storytelling, format, audience, etc., delivery points impact the way that you're going to go about this. And feel free to invent something, like put some constraints for yourself, come up with different business cases, use something that happened to you already, think about whether you would go differently about this now that you have heard about those different points. Maybe you knew them already, I don't know. But yeah, basically take these 5-10 minutes as an opportunity to look at your data set and questions with that angle, right? So who do you need to convince? Why? How will you deliver your presentation? And yeah, think large. Think about your past experiences, leverage all of your database experiences here, and see if there's some stuff that you could have done better. I don't see any questions here in the chat, so let's take a couple more minutes, and at 3:10, we will keep going, and we will jump finally about some database fundamentals. So we're going to talk charts. We're going to talk data types. We're going to talk situations. So 2 more minutes and we dive into the concrete data visualization stuff. Good question, Alice. Well, there's a whole field about color theory. So I invite you to read some books and articles on the topic. That will be much, much better than what I could say. But basically, what I suggest to do is one, leverage the colors, the color schemes and gradients that are provided to you by the tools because they have been optimized, right? So if you use Tableau or if you use Seaborn or if you use R or if you use D3, there's tons of palettes that already exist, so don't try and reinvent the wheel. Those palettes usually are optimized to be both beautiful and efficient, and by efficient, I mean readable by everyone. Because there are some colorblind people out there, more than we may think, and different kinds of colorblindness. So the number one advice I would give when thinking about color is make sure that the colors you're seeing and the difference between the colors you're seeing, everyone can see them. Right? So there are some colors that you don't want to put side by side because colorblind people won't be able to make the difference. Right? You're going to be seeing two different colors, and they are just going to see two bars of gray, and they are not going to see which category, for example. So yeah, look into color blindness, look into colors that should not be next to each other, and armed with that knowledge, use that to select palettes that are already provided by by the tools you use, whether it's Tableau or Python or R. So I'm going to type that down here because I think that's the way the software classifies the questions as answered to. Something that I would add to this, Alice, is don't use color if it's not necessary. Right? So sometimes you have a bar chart and each bar is a different color, but we're talking about the same data, so there's no need. So don't put stuff on the chart if it doesn't need to better. Don't encode information that's not there. The simpler the better. I see there's more questions there now. Well, I recommend Tableau, personally. I'm a much bigger fan of Tableau. I find the Power BI interface too cumbersome, too slow. I don't feel at ease within Power BI, so Tableau definitely has my preference. But, try them and see which one you prefer. And then if tomorrow I have to work for a company that uses Power BI, I will use Power BI if I don't have any other choice. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to use Tableau. I'm not sure how they compare in terms of free versus paid though. So there might be a cost ponderation there. All right, let's keep going. But if any other questions come up, feel free to ask them in the chat. Very well. Database fundamentals. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not sharing the screen. Where is it? It's here. All right. So database fundamentals, a refresher and foundation to build upon. Yeah, maybe let's stop here a minute. So we're getting to the heart of the topic. We're going to cover some fundamentals. I'm going to gloss over them, right? So we're not going to spend too much time on those, but I imagine you might have some questions. I'm going to take this opportunity as well to help you choose which chart is appropriate for which situation, and I'm going to give you tools that you can refer to. So you don't need to remember about all of this, right? The whole objective of this session is to organize the different knowledge and ways to go about data visualization so that you know how to think about it, how to structure it, and where you can find the help so that you can focus on the V's and not on the approach, because the approach is laid out for you. Good. I do expect you to have had some exposure to this concept, so that's why I'm not going to talk about these as if they were completely new to you. If there are some charts that you don't know what they look like, we can have a look. I should have put them on the slide, but I don't have time, a space on all of the slides to put them. There's a few. Okay. This is extremely important, though. what chart you can use in which situation. So if you don't know about this, I encourage you to buy a book about this and learn about this. One good book about this is Visualize This by Nathan Yao. And I've put this resource in the drive that I will share with you. So this is good because it's a bit old in the sense that it's written in D3. I think there's like an old version of D3, and I think there's even some proto-viz examples, so the thing that was there before D3. But it's great at giving different examples of charts for specific situations and how to go about building them and the different things that you can play with in terms of parameters. So highly recommend this book. And again, those kind of books, these are the books that you read from page 1 to the end, right? It's a book that you go to when you have a specific question about a specific situation or a specific kind of chart. So get it, use it as a resource that you refer to when you need to. Also, there are some situations that might have some overlaps. There are some charts that you can use in 1, 2, 3 different situations. Don't let that confuse you. That's fine. Basically, the objective there is to take a step back and think about the nature of the message that you want to convey before building your viz. You need to think about exactly what you're trying to demonstrate here, and what you're trying to demonstrate falls within different categories. Maybe you just want to give a metric. So I said that stats and numbers are less memorable than stories and data viz, and I definitely stand by that. But sometimes you just want to say, hey, we reached our millionth subscriber, and okay, good. Well, then you want to highlight that million because it's a big achievement, Maybe you have a course platform and you want to say, hey, this is how many hours our top student has been studying on the platform since they first joined. Very well. Well, that's an interesting metric, and that's the number that's important here, right? So that's basically a memorable stat, number, finding, and so you can present it in a card, right? So it's something pretty and formatted. And sometimes you're going to present several numbers, right? And that's tables, and that's what you use when you are in an Excel sheet or when you read a data frame. That's already data visualization. It's not the most efficient run, right? Because you're looking at numbers, they are abstract, you're just streaming through tons of numbers. Fine, I agree. It's not the best most of the time thing that you can use, but it's data visualization. It's already representing data points. It's already putting some data into context. It's already establishing a logical structure and some relationships with rows and columns. And sometimes you can add some color, you add some color formatting, like green for positive, red for negative, whatever you want, really. But finance and accounting people especially know that a table can be used as a sort of data visualization, and that you can already glean some information if you use some color to format those. Okay, let's not spend too much time on this. Another thing that you might want to highlight is a pattern, right? A pattern, a cycle, a trend. So you're asking the question, what is the trend here? What is the trend? This is usually leveraged with time series for sure, because you're looking at trends over time, right? So like in I don't know, like stock investing, highs and lows, that kind of stuff, or sales, like Christmas, Black Friday, whatever. And so you can be looking for the trend, or you can be looking for where the trend breaks, so for some irregularities, right? So looking at the trend can also highlight some outliers. You can see some weird periods. You can see the spikes. You can see the dips. So that works well for that. And so you can use discrete and continuous data when you use that kind of situation, when you're in that kind of situation. And so some appropriate plots for this would be using some bars, some bar charts, some points, so line charts, scatter plots, or even a flow chart. A flow chart in itself is a pattern, right? You're showing a cycle. All right. Another thing that you may want another situation that you might find yourself in is comparing proportions, right? So what are the parts of the whole, right? For example, how is the budget allocated per department, right? So here you can use a pie chart. You can use a donut chart, which like pie chart gets a lot of hate, and donut charts are the new trend right now when you want to present that kind of data. You can use a stacked bar chart as well, because you can compare proportions that way. Usually pie charts are better represented with stacked bar charts. But you can also use a tree map, right? So what we saw with the biggest gas producers in the world, you use a tree map and you definitely see which ones are the major players and which one are smaller players, and how they relate, right? Or an area chart as well would work for that. And you can also be looking at the distribution of your data when you do that, right? So maybe you want to look at a histogram, or at a box plot, or at a density plot to do that kind of thing. Right, and so this applies to both discrete and continuous data as well. Another thing that you may want to highlight, maybe what you're trying to convey is a relationship. So how does one variable impact other variables, right? And so as one variable goes up, another can go up or go down. And it can be one that causes the other. They can be correlated. Correlation is hard to prove statistically, right? But if you use a scatter plot, it can be pretty explicit what variables move together. So at least you can prove that they move together. And maybe there's not one that causes the other, but they definitely move together, and we can rely on that movement. All right. So yeah, scatter plots, line graphs are your go-to plots for that kind of stuff. Maybe what you want to highlight is differences between variables, or the variables differ, right? For example, how does crime differ from one state to the other? Or to begin with, how does crime differ within one state? Like, is there more burglary, or murders, or rapes, or whatever, or assaults for a given state? So I don't know, maybe you're in Massachusetts and you're doing that profile with a star chart for Massachusetts, and yeah, what works well for those would be heat maps. They visually highlight differences, like what we saw here, right? Here we have a heat map, and we saw that here we have definitely like strong evidence for the TF model, and we know that here we have very little evidence for those models when it comes to these measures. So one look at it, and you can see what's really good and what's really bad. So heat maps work well. Spider, radar, star graphs, they work well. Nightingale, roses, they work well. Groups bar charts as well are pretty nice to compare variables that way. And then what you might want to do is compare the same viz but across categories, right? So maybe you have your distribution for your male customers, and you want to add your distribution for female customers, and you overlap those two, and you see how they differ, right? Or you do your box plots for I don't know, like connections to an app per day, Instagram, for example. Like how often do male consumers of Instagram check their app each day, and how often do female do that? And you do the box plot for each gender, and then you put them side by side, and you can compare those two categories. So sometimes you use the same visualization across categories to do that. And so same thing, you could do. You could compare crimes with a star chart across states. So you've done your star chart for Massachusetts. Well, maybe you do it for all of the states in the US, and you're going to quickly see which star charts are the same, which are different, which one goes very, very high on a specific metric. And so visually you get something really efficient. And it's pretty simple in the end to understand. Very specific data, geographical data. I remember someone asking about finding some resources for geographical data when you don't have longitude and latitude, right? So your area code, phone area code, IP address can help there. But yeah, if you have longitude and latitude, obviously that's a great. So you're interested here in how does the data change with space, right? And you might want to highlight different stuff. You might want to put dots on the map just to locate things. You might want to add traces, so to show some flows, maybe like, I don't know, for a trucking company, the different paths that the trucks can take. You can leverage the size of your dots, so you can have bubbles for, I don't know, like the population, but like it can help you compare the different data points that you have on the map. And you can use a choropleth, so it's a complex name to just say like a card with a color gradient. And all of this is really easy to build with Tableau, for example. I would definitely go to Tableau if I had some geographical data to analyze, because they are very well equipped to do that. All right, and so we've seen those situations. There's a few more, and I'm going to show you where you can look at those situations and what chart to use. There's an online resource, so just go there. You don't need to know that by heart. But there's a few more things that you can use to polish your charts, right? So the first thing that you may want to do is manipulate the data, right? So I've told you, like, don't build a visualization on a dirty data set, obviously. But you can go further than that, right? So if you have a line chart with a time series and you want the line to be a little less noisy because it keeps going up and down, you can smooth your data, right? You can use a rolling average. So you create a new feature with a rolling average, and you have a much smoother chart, and it's easier to see the trends and what's happening there. So that's data manipulation, but that's not manipulating the person that's going to consume your chart, right? You're not changing the data here, and you're not lying about the data either. You can use binning as well, with histograms. You can change the size of the bins and see how the histogram looks. And maybe there's a bin size that's better than another. As long as all of your bins are the same size, that's fine. And you may want to standardize your data if you're talking about things that are hard to compare, like, I don't know, the length of a political regime, for example. Like one could be, I don't know, 4 years, another one could be 50 years, and you want to see exactly when they were topping and when they got down or whatever. You're going to have to tend to standardize those before you start actually visualizing them. So there's some work that can be done on the data to make your job easier when you build your visualization. You can add dimensions to the chart, and that's a really important one. There's different ways to do that. So you can use color, you can use size, and you can use time. Time is a dimension. So color you would use with categorical data and with numerical data, depending on whether you want discrete colors or a gradient. Size you would use with numerical data, right? You would change the size of your dots on your scatter plot to add another dimension on it. I don't know, the size of the order, the number of connections, whatever. And so you add a new dimension. You had a scatter plot with X and Y, and you had a third dimension with the size of your dots, and then you have a bubble chart. So all of these charts have fancy names, but most of the time they rely on some fundamental ones, and then they are just there's some slight design changes. Time is an interesting one. When you have time, it's cool because you can animate your data and you can show how it evolves over time. So don't hesitate to do that and to leverage tools that let you do that. Play with the data and animate it with time. It's definitely very efficient when you're working with time series most of the time. And then you have feature engineering, which we hinted at when we talked about manipulation. But another way you don't want to put too many dimensions on your chart because you're going to make it too packed and difficult to understand after. But what you can do is pack several features in one, if that makes sense, obviously. But say you're trying to compare restaurants in a city and see which ones are very popular, which ones are not popular at all, and if there's any hidden gems, some very, very cool restaurants, but that are not that popular for some reason. And so some variables that you may have here, that could be data about the prices, data about the noise level in the venue, the ease of access, how popular it is, the hours it stays open in a week, because if they are only open one lunch out of 7, it definitely is a problem. Maybe the number of vegetarian options on the menu or options at all, etc., etc. Right? So you've got all of those metrics, and you could build a viz comparing each of these metrics separately. But maybe what you want to do is come up with a score where you pack some or most of these metrics together and come up with a score and use that score as a dimension on your graph. So you just add one dimension, but that dimension has a lot more dimension that it contains, right? And then it raises other questions about, well, is the equation for that score the right equation? And that's great because it leverages some new discussions about what we deem important and what we don't deem important, and we can play with the data and change the ponderation to see how it changes the visualization. Maybe that if you suddenly give the vegetarian options a much bigger weight, you're going to see a lot of restaurants that might have not been that popular so far. So that's also a nice way to play with the data, And another thing that you can add is, well, annotations, right? Annotations is you put an arrow, you point to something specific on your chart, and you explain what it is, or you highlight what you're pointing to. That helps understanding what's going on. That helps focusing attention. And then I've talked about interactivity. Interactivity for me is definitely the best because the more a person can play with the chart and try things with it, and the more likely they are to understand what's going on. So for example, I have an Excel sheet that I downloaded from a YouTube channel about savings and investing, etc. And it's an Excel sheet with 3 sheets in it about one sheet to make your budget, some visualizations that automatically adapt, some color coding to see if you're going over the budget that you should be allocating, etc. And obviously all of this works together and everything changes when you just change your numbers or put your numbers. And well, first of all, it's really efficient because you can see with the different numbers how that's going to impact you reaching your objectives or not, and you're doing a simulation right away. But what I really like about this tool is that it's incredibly efficient, but it's an Excel sheet, right? So you don't need to learn D3 to create some interactivity. You can be smart about it, and you can absolutely create some interactivity in Excel. So don't underestimate the power of interactivity. Good. Let's see if there are some questions, and otherwise we will keep going. And while I take some questions, you can also think, based on what we just talked about here, about the situation you're in with the dataset that you chose originally at the beginning of the session, and what would be a nice chart to use. And so to do that, what I recommend you do is you go on this website. There's probably others, but that's my go-to. It's a website that's built by basically the guy who builds all the charts at Datadogs that are then used by the enterprises. At least that's the way I understood his job. So he knows what he's doing. And basically, you can scroll down here, and you can see if you're in the situation where you want to look at the distribution, at the correlation, or at how variables evolve together. Are you looking at comparing and ranking some things? Are you trying to compare parts of the whole? Are you trying to see how things have evolved over time? Are you working with geographical data? Are you trying to show how things flow from one part to another? And based on that, you can then see which charts are recommended. It's not exhaustive, again, but it's good. It's a really nice tool to get started. So the examples here are in D3, but you also have the same website with Python. So if you do Python Graph Gallery, you got the same one, and you can see you don't necessarily have the same charts. And that goes back to some questions that we've had during the session about what is the best visualization or what is the best tool to convince your stakeholders. And it's not the way to go about this. The way to go about this is, who am I trying to convince first? Like, what's my question? What's my goal? Who's my audience? Then, what's the message that I'm trying to convey? What's the appropriate chart for this? And then only, how do I build this chart? And you might find out that the appropriate chart is not available in your Python package, is not available in your R package, is not available in whatever tool you're using. And that's why I think having several tools available that you master is a good thing to do. Any news website that provide beautiful and accurate charts? Yes, I can, and I will show you some at the end of the session. And what I'm going to do right now is, wait, can I send some messages here? Let me check. More chat, yes. I don't know if you guys have access to the chat, but I'm going to try and put some stuff there. So I'm sending you this here. Definitely let me know if you don't have access to this, but otherwise you have it on the screen, right? You have the D3 one for JavaScript. You have the R1 for R. And you can see R has a lot of things that you can do with it, right? Obviously, because ggplot rules. And I'm also going to put the address for the drive here. So that's going to be this one. There you go. So normally with that link, you can access it. Right? It's a shared link. So anyone on the internet with this link can view, copy link. Let me check if it's the same though. EVPSU. Yeah, that should be it. Very well. Let me still send it again. And so let me check who asked the question. Originate, let me close here. Did I lose the question? Yep, okay, that's here. So this is what I would recommend to look at some good charts. You can go on the New York Times. I haven't listed it here, but you have the New York Times. That was a pioneer in data visualization, that actually was a pioneer in D3. So they know what they're doing. So the charts by anything linked to database with the New York Times is a go-to. Information is beautiful. That's the website where we had the Russian gas and snake oil supplement visualizations. Definitely a go-to. Like if you want to see beautiful and accurate charts, you can go there. And there's usually a text explaining how the data was gathered, where it comes from, how the chart was built, etc., etc. The public Tableau gallery, they always put a viz of the day forward. So that's the thing I would recommend as well. I may not. No, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one. So the viz gallery. These are advanced stuff. Most of the time, it's infographics, etc. But it still has individual charts, etc. That shows you the good color schemes, the right way to go about a specific situation, etc. So that's definitely some go-to to develop your chart literacy. Flowing data, I was recommending a book called Visualize This by Nathan Yao before. Well, that's the website from Nathan Yao. So definitely recommend going there. Same thing with information is beautiful. That's a website, but that's also a book that I highly recommend because you've got tons of different questions and the answer with a visualization. So fantastic book to develop your chart literacy. And Reddit, data is beautiful. You have some cool stuff there. The great thing with Reddit is that you're very likely to be able to interact with the guy who posted the chart and to find out a bit more about how the chart was built if you want to, right? And you can also look at data is ugly in terms of subreddit. If you want to see some ugly charts, it can be fun sometimes. But don't build those. All right. All right, so let's keep going then and quickly wrap this all up, okay? We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go back to this. The idea for this session was to try and find your question, see if you had framed it correctly in the sense that, okay, what is the exact situation that I find myself in? What is the kind of message that I'm trying to convey? And is that a ranking? Is that a comparison? Is that a correlation? Is that and then find what chart would work with that. So we move on to the last part of this session, which is about structuring your approach. Right? So how do you go from your data set to an effective visualization? Right? How do you go from the data points to the graph? And which roads can you take to get there? Because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, as we have said many times today. All right, so there's different approaches. That there might be even more than what I'm listing here. The ones that I'm listing here are the ones that Jan McCandless recommends, right? So that's the guy from Information is Beautiful. The first approach is the angle. Now, what is it? It's basically what we just did, right? What am I trying to represent? So you can think about that. What am I trying to represent? Am I talking about the distribution? Am I talking about ranking? Am I talking about a pattern? And based on that, leverage the resources that I posted in the chat, and make sure that you're using the right chart for the job. So I'm not going to explain more about this. In the slide, there's a link for this approach, but that's basically what I just showed you before. So let's quiz this one, but I just wanted to let you know that the fundamentals that we just saw before, well, that's an approach in itself. Then you have top-down. I talked about chart literacy before. So this is where I want to insist about it. This is where I can piggyback on the question that was just asked about some good websites for visualizations that are accurate. Top-down approach, when I highly recommend that you try it. I'm not saying that it's the best, but it's probably an approach that you don't use that much. And basically what you do with this approach is you choose a chart that you know works, that you've seen, that you remember, that you've seen somewhere, and you see if it would work with your data. So you don't go completely randomly about this, but you do see some similarities between the question or the situation that you have and a chart that you've seen before, and you think, hey, maybe this visualization was super effective. Maybe it would work well for what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Let's try it. And when I say let's try it, I'm not saying build it right away. I'm saying take a pen, take a paper, take a white sheet, and draft it, sketch it. You don't need to go to D3 or Python to see if it's going to work. You can just draw it, do an ugly drawing, but it's going to help you see if that has any chance of ending up being a good chart or not. So I'd recommend trying to do that. All right, so chart literacy. Right, so chart literacy. What do I mean by that? Well, look at some visits. Right, so go on those Tableau websites. On Information is Beautiful. On Data is Beautiful. Look at some charts. Bookmark the ones that you really like. Build your own resources, really, and then you can leverage that when you're in a database situation, and you don't start from scratch. The idea is to never start from scratch if you can avoid that. Right? Very well. So yeah, it's a great approach because it helps you emulate the experts, but it requires an effort, which is building chart literacy. But the way it works is a little like recognizing quality clothes or pairing wine with food. You can't do that just walking into a store if you've never thought about it. You can't pair wine and food well if you've never done it before. But the more you do it, the more you touch some clothes in luxury shops, the more you pair wine with food, and the more you know what works, and the more you can recognize what's going to work together, and what's quality, what isn't. Bottom-up approach. That's the most structured, in my opinion. That's probably the one that you use. And what you do here is you start with your question, You write down your goal, you write down your audience as well. I think I forgot to put it there, but you write down your audience. You identify your metrics that you have and their type, right? And so then you choose some primary metrics, which are the ones that really focus on what you're trying to demonstrate, and some secondary metrics that you might use to, I don't know, add color, size, etc. So add some more information. But like your primary metrics, for example, they would go on a scatter plot that would be your X and Y, right? And then you choose a viz based on that, right? And once you have chosen the viz that works for the type of metric that you have, you map your metrics to the appropriate channels on the viz. So by channel, I mean X, Y, size, color.
Hi, Adrian. This is
Yeah.
Jeremy here. I'm sorry to interrupt. We might need to end this session in another 5 more minutes because we need to start another session. So might be best if we move towards a Q&A session soon. And
yeah, no problem.
if you have any questions, this will be the good time to ask. I think you only have 2 more slides left, right, Adrian?
Yeah, I don't have much slides left.
Yeah. Okay, sure.
Yeah, so bottom-up approach, I'm going to put a website on the slide where you basically click on what kind of category of variables you have, and it's going to tell you which chart works well with that. So let me show you here. When I'm talking about the data profile, basically you fill in this card. You write your question, goal, audience. You put all of your metrics. You choose the primary ones. You put the metric type, so category code, range, date, and you write the visual channel that you're going to put on your chart. And to do that, what I recommend you use is this website, data2viz. What the heck is that? No. Okay, from data2viz. Bookmark this, but I put it in the resources. And so you can choose what variable you have, numeric, categoric, cat, maps, network, and then how many of those you have. And you go down the graph, and it's going to tell you which graph works well. So you don't need to know that by heart, leverage those resources. All right. So that's bottom up. The other approach is combo. So you just go back and forth between the different approaches. You'll go bottom up, or you keep going back to your question or the metrics you have, because maybe the metrics you have are not exactly what you need to answer your question. Maybe you change the scale of an axis. Maybe you change the way you combine your variables. Maybe you switch from a scatter plot to a bubble chart. But there is always some kind of back and forth. So don't worry if you go back and forth. Hopefully, now when you go back and forth, you know where you go back to and where you go forth to. So you don't feel like you have to redo everything. You know where you stand in your work. I will take the questions and answer them. And then just to wrap this up, if you want to learn more about those topics, you can do some further research about color theory, typography. The history of data visualization is incredibly interesting, how we went from Minard's work to web interactivity. You can look into presentation, storytelling, specific advice, written report advice. Take a class to become better with the tool you use, whether it's Tableau or Python or whatever. And learn a new tool to expand your possibilities. I've told you shouldn't get married to a tool because maybe it won't do what you're trying to do well. So learn another tool, expand your horizons. And you can read about neuroscience as well, like thinking fast and slow, the visual brain, the analytical brain, to better understand our biases and how you can avoid some pitfalls when presenting your results, and develop your chart literacy, obviously, and practice. That's how you get good. Okay, so some books. Information is Beautiful. Flowing Data by Nathan Yao. Jan Holtz, that's the websites that we've seen to help you. And then these are about the history of graphics, which I think is a fascinating field. Very well. And if you want to get in touch or keep in touch, you can reach me here. So let me move on to the questions. I don't see any new questions. So unless I'm missing anything, I think, or you want to ask a very last minute question, you have 1 minute to do it. Otherwise, we can wrap this up.
Yep. Is there any last question for Adrian? No?
Make sure that you bookmark the Google Drive link that's in the messages, because that's where I'm going to find the resources that I've talked about in the course, in the session.
Yep. So I think if 1 second, we do have.
There's a question here.
Yep.
The list of books, I will put them in the resources as well, but let me show them again here if you want to do a screenshot maybe. These are the ones that I recommend. So those are websites, those are books. But Ian McCandless and Nathan Yao, if you put them on Amazon, you will have some books as well. So Information is Beautiful is a book as well, and Flowing Data is the website, but Visualize This is the book by Nathan Yao.
Okay. Then I think with that, Hadrien, I would like to thank you so much for joining this event. You can see you put in a lot of effort preparing the materials and the slides. Personally, I enjoyed your session a lot, and I think and I believe that all of the participants share the same opinion too. In case you would like to reach out to Hadrien, I think just now Hadrien did share his LinkedIn profile, so feel free to reach out to Hadrien. With that, Hadrien, I'd like to thank you so much and hope to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Have a good one.
So for the rest of the participants, we do have one final session for this big data event. Let me share my screen. So we do have one more session from Nathaniel Rose, who is a senior software engineer from Ripple. So he'll be talking about orchestrating DBT transformation with GitLab CI/CD. So do not miss out this last session. So I'll see you in the next few minutes.